He wasn't there to protest. He wasn't there to plead. He was there to remember. But when they sentenced him like a criminal, one phone call turned the courtroom upside down. What happens next will leave you speechless and questioning everything we think justice looks like. The dark wooden door of the Eastbrook County Courthouse creaked open. Just a soft, aged breath of a sound. In the courtroom, no one really looked up. A few quick glances. A couple of furrowed brows. Then eyes returned to their phones, case files, or that vacant, practiced stare. Ezekiel Zeke, Monroe walked in with a slow but steady gait. He wore an olive green flannel shirt with the sleeves casually rolled, old khaki pants pressed clean, and a pair of dark brown leather boots, worn thin by time but polished with care. In his left hand was a faded felt hat. His right rested gently on the edge of the wooden defense table as he lowered himself into the defendant's seat, not afraid, and certainly not defeated. Zeke was 78. An old man, yes, but he still sat with his back straight. His face bore hard-earned lines, not from time alone, but from the long roads of a life the history books forgot to name. The charge placed before him read in dry legal print: unlawful trespass on redeveloped property. Just one line, but it cut straight through a man's dignity. No one in the courtroom saw the man who had once received a civic medal from the city for his contributions to sustainable urban housing in the 1970s. No one remembered that he had helped design the very South Side neighborhood, where he had just been arrested for unauthorized occupation. To them, he was just an old black man in decent clothes, sitting alone on a cold wooden bench. No lawyer, no family, no one to speak for him. From the prosecutor's side, a couple of young interns whispered under their breath, "Another freeloader squatting again." They always pull this. Take land, cry victim, looks like one of those bus stop grandpas. Wonder who lent him that shirt. Zeke heard it all. His hearing was just fine, but he didn't respond. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't bow his head. He simply sat there, fingers gently brushing the brim of his old hat, like smoothing out an old memory. His eyes faced forward, silent but steady, as if he was waiting not for judgment, but for truth to reveal itself. In the corner of the courtroom, Angela and Gwynn, the 30-year-old court clerk, paused mid-scribble. Something about the man's face struck her as familiar. A city council meeting, maybe. A blue-tinted blueprint. A man explaining the layout with a warm, deep voice, holding a well-worn drafting pencil shaved nearly to the eraser. She shook her head, pushing the feeling away. Zeke stayed seated. He didn't need to be told what was coming. He knew his life was about to be judged by a system he once helped design. But here was something no one expected. He hadn't come to beg for mercy. He had come to see if justice still remembered its own history. Zeke sat in silence, hands resting calmly on his knees, eyes fixed ahead. But inside his mind, a different image bloomed. Not this cold courtroom, but a small cream-color house on Jefferson Street, from long ago, with a porch he had carved by hand. Summers filled with laughter, and long winters where two aging hands held each other tightly beside the fireplace. That house hadn't been built from bricks and mortar. It was built from memory. Its foundation was a promise that he and his wife, Eleanor, would grow older together. They bought the land back when Eastbrook didn't yet have a highway, when power lines still hung from crooked wooden poles. Zeke had measured every inch himself, dug the foundation, hammered each beam into place. Eleanor had picked out the curtains, planted lavender by the porch, and every afternoon she would bake apple turnovers a whole block came to recognize by scent alone. Zeke had never forgotten the day she passed. It was a gusty October afternoon. He had just finished painting the white picket fence in the yard. She was sitting on the porch swing, smiling faintly, then quietly closed her eyes. The house turned cold after that. But Zeke stayed, because in that place he could still hear her call, "Zeke, honey," from the kitchen, could still see the paint stain under the stairs where their granddaughter had knocked over an entire can of color while playing. Then came the redevelopment. The city posted notice of land seizure, commercial development zone. The house was appraised like an obsolete obstruction. Zeke fought back. He submitted blueprints, photos from 1983, even the original construction permit, but all of it was deemed legally void. The new developers offered a pitiful payout. He refused. He moved out, but his heart stayed behind, on that porch. When he returned to sit on the steps of the house, now boarded up and tagged with red warning paint, it wasn't trespassing. It was remembrance, a man revisiting the past, sitting in silence for a few minutes, surrounded by memories that couldn't be taxed or bulldozed. Zeke understood the law, but he also understood that some things were more sacred than a deed, like love, memory, and a lifetime poured into the walls of a home. What he was asking for wasn't property. He wanted acknowledgement that his life had helped build this place, not just with concrete, but with heart. In the courtroom, the murmurs continued, but Zeke no longer really heard them. Even the judge's gavel didn't shake him, because inside him, the clearest sound was the soft click of that old wooden door closing each night, and Eleanor's gentle laugh asking, "Zeke, are you painting the fence again tomorrow?" Courtroom 2C of the Eastbrook County Courthouse was bathed in cold, sterile white light, matching the airless stillness in the room. Atop the high judge's bench, Judge William Sloan adjusted his reading glasses, flipping through the case file with all the enthusiasm of someone scanning a lunch menu, not someone weighing a man's future. At 62, Judge Sloan looked worn, stern, not from moral conviction, but from the kind of fatigue that comes from decades of ruling, without needing to feel anything. Ezekiel Monroe, he read slowly, as though sounding out a foreign name, 78 years old, charged with unlawful occupation of sealed public property, no legal counsel, no registered residence, no verified documentation of ownership. Zeke still sat straight-backed. He didn't bow his head. He said nothing. He knew he had nothing to prove but memory, and in this place, memory carried no legal weight. "Mr. Monroe." Judge Sloan's voice was curt, polished in that familiar brand of practiced condescension. "Do you have anything to say before I issue sentencing?" Zeke looked him square in the eye. There was no hatred in his gaze, just the calm of a man who had seen more than war and grief combined. "I simply sat where I once lived," he said quietly, "where I built with my own hands, where I laid to rest the love of my life." Judge Sloan waved a dismissive hand, as though brushing away a breeze too trivial to matter. "We do not rule on memory, Mr. Monroe. We rule on action, and your actions were unlawful." From the clerk's table, a judicial assistant leaned forward slightly, as if to interject, but then stopped herself. The air in the courtroom thickened, heavy with the kind of authority no one dared confront. "The law doesn't operate on nostalgia," Sloan continued, this time dropping any pretense of civility. "Everyone has a past, but no one gets to place themselves above the law because they believe something should still belong to them." A few whispers passed through the gallery. A man bowed his head. A young woman stared down at her phone. And Zeke, he just tightened his grip on the soft brim of his worn fabric hat, the same as he always did, and said nothing. Judge Sloan tapped the gavel, more out of habit than conviction, as if confirming the courtroom's monotony. 30 days in Eastbrook County detention, effective immediately. The gavel struck. No one objected. No one rose. No one defended. Just Zeke, an old man labeled a violator by the system, stepped down from the defendant's seat, as if walking through a door colder than the jail cell that awaited him. At the clerk's table, Angela and Gwen absently traced the edge of the next case file. It was an unconscious ritual. She was meticulous, discreet, and always silent inside the courtroom, where every spoken word could be turned into evidence. But this time, she couldn't take her eyes off the man who had just been sentenced to 30 days in lockup, as if he were nothing more than another nameless drifter. Ezekiel Monroe. She repeated the name silently, her eyes following the bent but steady figure retreating from the stand. His weather hat held like it cradled a life's worth of meaning. There was something about him that struck her, not pity, but a strange sense of recognition. And then, as if a gust of wind had blown the dust off old memories, a flash, a middle-aged man in rolled sleeves, holding a long wooden ruler, explaining zoning grids to a group of young engineers in front of a city planning map. She had been a 19-year-old intern then, clumsy, forgetful, always getting lost, but he had always been patient. A city isn't just streets and buildings, he had once said. It's where people live, love, and return to in memory. Angela's fingers flew across the internal database. She found a rare archive. West Side Residential Development Project, 1987. Listed under Chief Engineer, Ezekiel Monroe. Emotions surged, but she knew memory alone wouldn't reverse a verdict. She needed evidence. She needed a breakthrough. At that very moment, the clerk's landline rang. A sharp, unexpected sound that startled nearly everyone in the courtroom. Angela picked up. On the other end, a composed female voice rang out. "Good afternoon. This is Dr. Lena Ashford, Director of the City Architectural Archives. I was informed that someone named Ezekiel Monroe is currently being tried in your courtroom. I'm calling to confirm that Mr. Monroe was one of the original architects who designed the Eastbrook Civic Complex. More importantly, he is the last living individual listed on the foundational plans of the property currently in dispute." Angela froze. Her voice trembled slightly. "Can you send over a notarized copy immediately?" "It's already been faxed. The original is en route." Hanging up, Angela shot to her feet, no longer hesitant, only certain. She didn't wait for Judge Sloan's attention or his gavel. She grabbed a fresh stack of documents from the fax machine and walked briskly toward the bench. "Your Honor," she announced clearly, "I have new evidence that may fundamentally change the nature of this case." The room fell silent. Judge Sloan raised an eyebrow, barely concealing his annoyance. "What are you doing, Ms. Nguyen?" he asked sharply. Angela took a breath, locking eyes with him. "The director of the City Architectural Archives, Dr. Lena Ashford, has confirmed Mr. Ezekiel Monroe was the lead architect behind the original Eastbrook Civic District. He wasn't trespassing. He was returning to a place he helped build. And this," she held the papers high, "is a notarized copy of the original blueprint file." She handed it over. Judge Sloan took it, flipping through a few pages quickly. His eyes slowed when they met the red seal, the official signature. For a brief moment, something shifted in his expression, hesitation. Then he placed the folder down. "But his name is no longer on the current property title," Sloan said flatly, his voice as brittle as dry wood. "And the legal status remains unchanged." Angela clenched her fists. "But Your Honor, you issued a sentence before this document was introduced. That's no longer a fair trial." Zeke remained seated. He didn't look at the judge. He looked only at Angela, this quiet court clerk now standing like a defender. The courtroom was still. So still, the soft rustle of papers from the stenographer echoed across the chamber. Judge Sloan exhaled deeply, as if forced to endure a melody he never asked to hear. "Fine, Mr. Monroe. If you have anything to say in mitigation, you have 2 minutes," he said, voice mechanical, emotionless. Zeke Monroe didn't rise right away. He sat still, one hand resting atop the old felt hat in his lap. There was no confusion, no anger. He looked up slowly, eyes deep and weathered like a canvas layered with forgotten brushstrokes. When he spoke, it was quiet as wind, yet heavy as stone. "I'll speak when you're ready to listen." The courtroom froze. Judge Sloan raised an eyebrow, surprised, though trying not to show it. He smirked slightly. "I'm listening now, Mr. Monroe. Go ahead." Zeke exhaled softly, then nodded. "That house used to be mine," he began, voice steady and low. "I wasn't there to take anything. I was just sitting on my front porch, the one I built with these hands, the place where my wife and I laughed, cried, lived, the place she sang lullabies to our daughter every night, and where I held her hand for the last time." A ripple of quiet emotion passed through the room. Angela Nguyen, the court clerk, looked up, blinking fast. Her face froze as faded memories began sharpening into focus. Zeke continued, his voice unwavering. "I didn't bring a lawyer, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to turn memories into evidence. I came here to see if this law still remembers what it was made for, because, Your Honor, I believe the law has a memory problem." A hush fell over the courtroom, thick like a velvet curtain lowering across the stage. Judge Sloan stiffened for a moment, not out of offense, but because of the piercing truth in Zeke's words, a truth that scraped at the hardened shell he wore. Zeke gave a faint smile, not triumphant, but sorrowful. The kind of smile from someone who's witnessed too much forgotten too easily. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly. "I'm just asking, can we still see the human behind the charge, or has that been replaced by protocol?" No one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, something shifted, not the law itself, but the air it moved through. Judge William Sloan picked up the document again, his finger tracing the red official seal. He stared at Ezekiel Zeke Monroe for a few moments, not with compassion, not with justice, but with a void, a space where procedure and prejudice had chewed through his ability to truly hear. Finally, he tapped the gavel again, this time not to deliver a new sentence, but to reinforce the one already pre-decided: evidence be damned. Defendant Ezekiel Monroe, 30 days in the Virginia County Jail, effective immediately. No one said a word. No one protested, because no one was surprised. These were the kinds of rulings people had grown numb to. But today, the silence felt different, heavier, uneasier. Zeke didn't nod. He didn't protest. He didn't beg. He simply lifted the old felt hat beside him, gently brushing away an imaginary speck of dust from the brim, and stood. "Before I'm taken," he said, his eyes turning not to the judge, but to the court clerk, "I'd like to make one call." Judge Sloan raised an eyebrow, poised a mock, then merely nodded toward the officer beside him. "He's permitted. Let him call." Zeke was led from the courtroom, in his hands. The young officer handed him a wired landline, its coil cord plugged into a wall box. No smartphone, no contact list. He picked up the receiver, dialed from memory. 3 rings. "Yes?" A woman's voice answered, curt and clear. Zeke closed his eyes. He only said 3 words. "It's time now." He hung up the phone. No one but the officer understood what had just happened. But Zeke's face no longer held the look of waiting. It was a gaze of a man who knew that every brick pulled from memory was about to be laid back, this time in a way no system could stop. Less than 10 minutes later, while paperwork was still being processed, a rush of footsteps echoed to the courthouse's main corridor. The sound of polished leather shoes against marble spread like a drumbeat into the marrow of the building. The courtroom doors flew open again, this time without a knock, without permission. The sharp click of heels sliced through the heavy air like a cold blade. A woman entered, tall, composed, with piercing eyes and jet black hair tied neatly behind her head. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, a brown leather case held firmly in one hand. Judge William Sloan frowned. "And who are you? This court has already ruled." "If it pleases the court," she interjected, striding confidently to the front. "My name is Raina Monroe. I am the daughter of Ezekiel Monroe, the defendant in question today. I'm also an attorney specializing in property law and elder legal defense under the Massachusetts State Bar Association." From her leather case, Raina withdrew a thick file certified by the assessor's office. Her voice was clear, authoritative. "This is the legal deed of ownership for 12 Jefferson Street. The property in question, the very place this court alleges my father unlawfully occupied. The original deed includes a non-revocation clause for residency, and there's confirmation from the city building department that the house was never classified as abandoned. The court is prosecuting a man as a squatter," Raina continued. "But the paperwork, the ownership, and the city's own history show he was sitting on the threshold of a home tied to his name by law and by legacy." She lifted her gaze. "Furthermore, as director of the Eastbrook City Architecture Council, I brought supplemental documents, building ordinances, project permits, letters of commendation from former mayors, all bearing the same name sign at the bottom: Ezekiel Monroe, Chief Urban Planner of Eastbrook, 1973 to 1989. Your Honor," she added, her voice low but ringing with clarity, "the man you're calling a trespasser is the man who designed and helped build part of the city. That sealed home? It was the first completed residence in a veterans' housing project, one he built himself and lived in with his wife for 42 years. Judge Sloan's face drained the color, but before he could respond, a younger voice cut through the air from the back of the courtroom. "Ms. Monroe, Malik Johnson, a young reporter from the Eastbrook Herald, stood holding up his phone, live streaming the entire session. Can you confirm this is the same Ezekiel Monroe who won the 1975 Public Architecture Award? I can, Raina replied, still looking at her father. The same man the system just sentenced for sitting on his own front porch. The courtroom erupted into a storm of murmurs. Several people stood up. Angela Gwynn, the court clerk, trembled as she removed her glasses, trying to hold back tears. But the true turning point came when a man stood from the back row, silver hair, tailored suit, and a round silver badge pinned to his chest. Apologies for the interruption, he announced, pulling out a slim leather wallet and opening for all to see. My name is Thomas McKinley, director of the Eastbrook Office for Historic Preservation. His voice was firm, unshakable. I am here under an emergency summons from Director Monroe, and I can confirm the house in question was officially placed under consideration for community architectural heritage status last month. No entity has a legal authority to evict or detain the original architect. Based on that, any enforcement action or criminal charge is unlawful. The air exploded. Camera flashes fired nonstop. Judge Sloan turned pale, his hand shaking slightly as he set the gavel down. I need to review the file, he stammered. I wasn't aware. Raina lifted her chin, her gaze free of anger, just a calm, practiced look of someone all too familiar with recurring injustice. It's not that you weren't aware, Your Honor, she said. It's that you never cared to look closely enough. Zeke remained silent, but in his eyes, for the first time in years, there was light, not because he'd been vindicated, but because truth had, at last, walked in under its own power. Angela Gwynn, the clerk, removed her glasses again, her hands trembling. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. Your Honor, I've also rechecked the city's records. The system confirms that Mr. Monroe served as lead engineer for the Alderwood housing development from 1972 to 1983. Judge Sloan had nowhere left to hide. His eyes flicked through every line of ink on the pages before him, every crimson red stamp burning against the paper. The wooden gavel in his hand trembled ever so slightly. This court acknowledges the supplemental evidence as valid and legally binding. His voice was dry, not from emotion, but from swallowing the pride he'd once worn like armor. The 30-day sentence is hereby vacated. Mr. Ezekiel Monroe did not trespass or unlawfully occupy private property. He paused, glancing at Zeke, who remained seated, calm as ever, as if he had always known this moment would come. This court recognizes Mr. Monroe as the rightful legal owner of 12 Jefferson Street. It was not an apology. There were no words of remorse. But every syllable was a step backward from indifference, not forgiveness, just surrender to the truth. No one in the courtroom clapped, but every eye was fixed on the old man in the dark flannel shirt and the weathered brown hat, as if, for the first time, they truly saw him. Angela Gwynn gave a small nod. Malik Johnson, the young reporter who had waited for his headline, simply closed his phone. There was nothing more to write, because the story had already said everything. Zeke said nothing. He simply bowed his head, slightly, toward his daughter, the one who had brought truth into the courtroom not with shouting or force, but simply by standing her ground, like an undeniable fact. The ruling was overturned, the files closed, but no one in the courtroom dared call it victory. There were no cheers, no applause, only a heavy silence, as if the entire court had just realized it had nearly overlooked a great man because of prejudice and procedure. Zeke Monroe stood up slowly, with no rush, no need for declaration. He lifted the old knit cap, faded by the years, and placed it on his head with hands still faintly trembling from the chill room that felt colder than any prison cell. He turned his head, eyes scanning the courtroom, not to blame, but to remember. Then he walked out, his worn leather boots striking steady rhythms on the stone floor. At the threshold, he paused, turned once more. His gaze no longer carried sorrow, only depth and resolve. Start listening. Start seeing. 8 words, yet they rang like a bell tolling between walls that had grown far too used to forgetting. No one responded. Even Judge Sloan sat frozen, his expression clouded by bewilderment he could not hide. Angela and Gwen clutched her notebook, eyes red and glassy. Outside the courthouse, a gentle afternoon breeze stirred the rows of maple trees, their leaves already turning a deep autumn gold. Ezekiel descended the brick steps as if he had walked them his whole life, and perhaps he had. There was no crowd to escort him, no news crews waiting. Just a man, 82 years old, who had once laid the foundations of an entire neighborhood, who had watched the city grow, only to have it forget him. But he carried no bitterness. He carried memory. And from that memory, he left behind something far more lasting than any verdict, a reminder of quiet resolve of dignity and a justice that lives not in law books, but in how we treat one another